Okay, so classic albums. The term gets thrown around a lot, half the time undeservedly, I won't lie. I'm pretty sure everybody's seen at least one album get called a classic that really don't deserve that title at all. That does beg the question though, what is a classic? What are the requirements and metrics used to determine what a classic is? The term classic is defined as a work of art of recognized and established value. An alternative definition is a thing that's judged over a period of time to be one of the highest quality and outstanding of its kind. Sounds pretty straightforward, but then again, quality is subjective. An album that I think is incredible might be monkey ass to the next person. There is an objective factor when it comes to classics as well, though. For me personally, there's three things that could give an album the title of a classic. Sometimes you can't just have one of them, though. Sometimes you have to have at least one of the other things, too. Okay, that might not make sense. Let me explain. First, you have popularity. An album could get the classic title just off of straight up popularity. 1989 by Taylor Swift is an undeniable classic, despite the fact that there's a good ton of people that don't like her or think her music is heavily overrated. Selling over 1 million first week is actually absurd. You couldn't go anywhere in 2014 without hearing that album. Literally anywhere. I literally memorized the lyrics to Blank Space without ever playing the song myself a single time. Shake It Off got ran into the ground to the point that I started hearing it at night as I fell asleep. Style and Bad Blood. Okay, I'm not gonna lie, I threw them on a couple times myself. Them shits was low-key bangers. The point is, 1989 is an example of an album that's undeniably a classic regardless of how good you think it is. With how widespread and inescapable it was, there isn't much of an argument against it. There are some albums that are very popular but can't automatically be called classics based just off that, but 1989 was so wildly popular that it completely eclipses the need to meet the standards of the other metrics. I personally don't think 1989 is some kind of incredible revolutionary piece of music. I just think it's a sturdy pop album, but I can't deny that it's a classic at all. Don't get me wrong, I'm not a sales and popularity is everything person. I'm always going to value things like the actual quality of the music the most. But when it comes to classic albums, popularity has to be a factor in some way. For example, Forever Story by Jid came out in 2022. That shit was hard as fuck, and in my opinion, the best rap album of that year without much debate. I don't see it ever becoming a classic though. It can, but it's not likely, simply because it didn't get anywhere near enough attention relative to a lot of other albums that we call classics. For albums like these, I think it makes more sense to put them in other categories of classics. Cult classics or classics in specific areas of music. Being called a classic in the overall category of music requires a certain level of attention from large amounts of people. I say Forever Story is potentially a hip-hop classic, but not an overall classic, feel me? Same with an album like, let's say, 1999 by Joey Badass. Well known inside the rap community and widely loved within the genre, but overall, in music in general, it's hard to say they're really classics. An album that I say gets the classic label mainly because of the popularity is Views by Drake, for example. I don't think it's one of his best, and overall it's a decent album, but it sold over 1 million first week, and the album remains his highest selling to date. Had numerous memorable songs that cemented Drake as a hit maker. That's another album it's hard to say isn't a classic, just because it's not a classic quality-wise, exactly. This isn't to say that every popular album is automatically a classic solely because of the sales or radio play, but y'all get what I'm saying. The second metric out of the three is a combination of a few different things: impact, influence, and nostalgia. You can say that's not too different from popularity, but there's a bit of a difference. Many albums have become classics over time because they have staying power. Others are classics because of the impact of a certain moment or the effects the album had. Watch the Throne by Kanye and Jay-Z wouldn't really be at the top of either of their discographies. They both have numerous better albums. But the two biggest rappers in the world getting together on an album that had a bunch of very memorable bangers, No Church in a While, Otis, Niggas in Paris, sold almost 500K first week. It was damn near an automatic classic, and there isn't too much of a question that it's a classic now. Not the greatest album, really just a good or great album, but it was the moment and the impact that really did it. Since we're on the topic of Kanye, there's 808s and Heartbreak. I'm going to be honest, one of the lower tier Ye albums for me in terms of quality alone. I don't think it was that amazing, and I was never a huge fan of it. Still got a few songs I fuck with heavy. I love Streetlights, I love Heartless, but it's not regarded as a classic for its quality, at least in my eyes. It's regarded as a classic because of its influence, the impact it had on production in hip-hop and on the genre in general. It birthed quite a few new sounds and artists in the industry and is recognized as one of the pioneer albums in the sad nigga category of rap. The last of the three metrics that I think are used to determine classics is always going to be the most important to me, and that's quality alone. Like I said before, These three metrics often intersect and combine to judge whether an album is a classic. Sometimes an album is brilliant but isn't popular enough and doesn't have the impact to be a classic. Sometimes an album is popular but it's buns. I can admit that quality is probably the least important of the three in general, just because there's so many albums that can never be classics because they lack attention. Popularity or influence are much more likely to guarantee that an album is a classic. However, it's much more impressive when an album is so good that it becomes a classic without needing to have mind-blowing sales. Of course, quality is subjective, but normally, when an album is considered a classic based purely on how good it is, it's because it received widespread critical acclaim, like To Pimp a Butterfly, for example, which critics absolutely adore for good reason. Mad Villainy didn't even sell 200K copies total, I think. I'd have to double check that, though. Never made it into the top 150 on the billboards. It was damn near an underground rap album, yet it's still undeniably a classic just because of how great it is. At least a hip-hop classic. Blonde didn't exactly do Taylor Swift or Drake numbers, but it's so good that the album somehow increases in popularity the more years go by, even though Frank hasn't dropped the album in 8 years. You know how crazy it is that it's been almost a decade and Frank is still sitting at 35 million monthly listeners on Spotify? Maybe he's not dropping because he's only getting more popular the more he doesn't drop. Yeah, we need to go on strike. This isn't me trying to call Frank some kind of underground artist or say that Blonde wasn't popular. It was. But there is levels to popularity. Frank isn't the most well-known artist. Blonde is a classic primarily because of quality. Same could be said for Good Kid, Mad City. The two albums that really made Kendrick mainstream, GKMC and TPAB, before he made his most successful album, Damn, the quality of those albums is what pushed him to the mainstream in the first place. Unfortunately, the quality metric is the one that has the most borderline classics, ones that can't get over the hump of not getting enough overall attention, so they're stuck being classics in one genre or one category of music. There's also a lot of cult classics, albums that fans of a certain artist or a certain group of music listeners really like, but outside of that circle, it's not that highly praised or highly noticed. Now, I guess after all that jibber jabbering, it makes sense to give some examples, so why not? Disclaimer, I'm not saying any of these are facts. It's just my opinion based on how I view things. Rumors by Fleetwood Mac is an example of an undeniable classic. 25 by Adele, undeniable classic. Forget about the fact that it's fucking amazing. 3.5 million sales first week? What the fuck? What was she on, bruh? 21 is a classic too, by the way. 24 Karat Magic by Bruno, absolutely a classic. When I say I heard nothing but this coked out, handsome, sharp jawline ass, smooth ass nigga's voice in 2016, I could not catch a break, bruh. Lucky for you, that's what I like. And then 2 seconds later, 24 Karat Magic in the air. And then 2 seconds later, Versace on the floor. And then 2 seconds later, dripping in finish. Like, alright, bruh, we get it, bruh. We get it. Great album, though. I ain't hating. Mind you, this dude don't got a solo album since the same year as Frank, and he's sitting at over 70 million monthly listeners. I don't know how he gets overlooked when we talk about the biggest stars of our generation. By the way, Doo-Wops and Hooligans gotta be a classic too, right? Like, come on, how many timeless songs are on that? Grenade, Just the Way You Are, Runaway Baby, the Lazy Song, Talking to the Moon, god damn. I say Pinata by Freddie Gibbs is a hip-hop classic. Section 80 by Kendrick is a cult classic. Atrocity Exhibition is a cult classic too, specifically for the experimental rap fan base. I'd say Lost Tapes is another cult classic example. Take Care is a classic. The entire College trilogy is classic albums. If we're being real, you could easily argue that Ye has the most classics of any hip-hop artist in history, and there wouldn't be much to debate. There's also the question of how fast can an album become a classic? Some people feel like the term instant classic is a paradox because the term classic itself can be defined as judged over a period of time to be one of the highest quality and outstanding of its kind. An album does have to age well to be considered a classic, so I do agree that you can't determine that an album is a classic right away. SOS is one of the too soon to tell albums. I feel like Control has cemented itself as a classic though. It's been enough time. Vultures, for example, aged horribly, and it hasn't even been that long. Mr. Morale, though, initially came out to kind of mixed reviews, but it's been aging extremely well, and it's grown on a lot of people. A recent album that I think can now be called a classic is Igor. It's been half a decade, still widely regarded as Tyler's best album and one of the best experimental albums from a rapper ever. I don't know. It's hard to say for sure because while it's sort of subjective, there's also a very objective element to it. Still debatable at times, but there's definitely a lot of albums that get called classic, and it's like, slow down now. A classic isn't just good or great. It's usually an amazing album with an insane amount of reach or impact, and definitely one that's still remembered or talked about 10, 15, 20, 25 years after it dropped.